there's a real possibility that at the deepest part of the crisis, we will return to gold standard. Gold was the only thing that really showed a remarkable rise when we analyzed the past crisis.
Please join us for our next live stream, Sunday, May 3rd at 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll go over current events, past guests, and of course, gold and silver news. Once again, our next live stream will be Sunday, May 3rd, 9 p.m. Eastern. See you then. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Silver Bullion Television, SBTV. I'm your host, Patrick Vieira. Tuomas Malinen, Chief Economist of GnS Economics, an adjunct professor of economics at the University of Helsinki, joins us today. Tuomas is one of the more active guys on Twitter, and he has been passing along some really great info on the economics of a pandemic. And I do hope you'll follow him on Twitter at MT Malinen. His current research interests include economic growth, business cycles, economic crisis, monetary unions, and income inequality. Tuomas, he brings an interesting and well-needed European perspective, and we are delighted to have him back again today as our guest. And as always, please do subscribe, click on the bell to be notified of new updates, and give us a thumbs up if you like what we do. It's time to saddle up and silver up for Tuomas Malinen. Good day, Tuomas, and welcome back to SBTV. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing fine. Nice to be back.
Glad to have you back. Tuomas, when we last spoke with you back in January, we hardly even discussed the virus pandemic issue back then. Fast forward, yes. And fast forward a few weeks, this pandemic has evolved into a major crisis globally, and the speed and escalation of the crisis, it's unbelievable. So I just want to start by asking you, how has life changed for you in the past few months, and what has life been like amidst measures like social distancing, perhaps lockdowns in Finland?
Yeah, we started the lockdowns in Finland really early before we had a single death from the virus. So we've been under they're kind of soft lockdowns, but we've been under for 6 weeks now, and the virus spread is definitely under control. And now we're talking about starting to raising those lockdowns. But for personally, well, of course, we all kind of migrated back to home to work. And for me, well, a few years back, I lived in New York, and I got used to working at coffee houses. So I did that quite a bit, so that changed. So now I work at home, and occasionally, a few days a week, usually, our hotels offer a working packages where you get the hotel for the day, not for the evening, but for the day. So I go there for, to freshen up, because just sitting at home, it will just, at least for me, it starts to eat my work motivation and efficiency. So, but those are the changes. But otherwise, it's because we were one of the first who warned on the possible dire consequences of the outbreak in late January. We've been quite busy with the firm, with doing the forecasts and stuff like that, following the spread of the virus and following the how it affects the economy, and oh man, it looks bad.
Yeah, I completely agree. I've been following some of your tweets, and I got to say, I for one appreciate that you're pretty active on Twitter. So we're getting a lot of great info out there from you. Appreciate that.
Good to hear.
Yeah, the mission of GnS Economics, which you founded, is to make black swans gray, and you've written in GnS Economic blogs that the COVID-19 is a true black swan. However, there are some guys who have a different point of view, such as Nassim Taleb, author of well-known books such as The Black Swan and Fooled by Randomness, and he's more of the opinion that it's not a true black swan because the pandemic is something that countries have already had procedures in place for. But nonetheless, why do you consider this pandemic to be a black swan?
Okay, well, now I'm going against the authority here, but yeah, we actually wrote in our Black Swan report, which was published in early March. We quoted Nassim there, and actually kind of made it clear that this is not in a black swan in a sense that we should have seen that when a shock hits the economy, the repercussions will be dire. But how we consider a black an this is we kind of think this as an economic black swan, and we consider it to be the fact that we couldn't forecast the timing of its onset, and that is what makes it a black swan. But it's actually a gray swan for the economy, kinda, because the fragilities of the global economy have been building for years,
Yeah.
and any shock smaller than this one would have been enough to topple the world economy or push us in the path to a depression. So this is a kind of a mixed a mixed picture. What we can mixed picture on what the COVID-19 actually is, but we consider it to be an economic black swan for sure.
Okay. So this the pandemic, this COVID-19, it's something that finally pushed the economy over the cliff. I mean, a lot of economies weren't doing that well anyway, but this was the one that pushed it over the cliff.
Yeah, this definitely is. If you think that there's never in the history of modern economies we have closed down societies for months across the globe. That's truly unprecedented. Really a massive economic experiment, and also societal experiment. So this is historical stuff, but the hit to the economy is just massive. Our banking sector, our zombie corporations, they will not sustain it. So it will get really bad from here on.
Yeah, you mentioned the societal experiment. It's a great point. The stages of collapse. You constantly update an article on your website titled "The Stages of Collapse," and in it you chronicle the 5 stages of collapse, starting with the onset, which you believe started back in February of 2020. Can you share with us more about why you're certain that February 2020 marked the start of the collapse?
Actually, we think that the collapse started on the 16th of September 2019. Yeah, when the repo markets blew up, and the Fed had to step in and back those markets up. And well, the Fed never left the markets, and now it is the capital markets of the U.S. It's just insane. But in February, the virus delivered a hit to the real economy. So that's kind of the financial crisis kind of started already in September in our thinking, but the full economic crisis started in February because the hit of the COVID-19 to the real economy, and those effects are just building in the global economy, and they will merge with the financial problems, and then we have possibly a complete collapse of the economic order, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, completely agree. Back in September, I think, a lot of things were still in the background, didn't really come out into the foreground until, as you mentioned, February. So yeah, I can completely agree with that. Can you share with us the second stage of the collapse, which you call the counterattack? And are we at this stage right now?
Yeah, we're definitely at that stage now. It's we kind of envisaged these stages in middle of in December, when there was no crisis, coronavirus pandemic yet. We just kind of measured out that how would the crisis play out regardless of the shock that started. And we kind of thought that after the onset of the crisis, which is basically the collapse, or not the collapse, but a crash in financial markets, it will be followed by very desperate and massive efforts of governments and central banks to uphold the over leveraged financial markets and the real economy. And this is exactly what we have seen now. So if you consider, for example, that the Fed has become the capital market of the U.S., it's It's yeah, we are definitely the contract. It's actually it's nuts. It's far deeper. Well, not far, but it's deeper than we thought. The counterattack phase. Yeah, so the means the central bankers and governments have unleashed have surprised even us. And this is a bit worrying in a sense that as this crisis will not be passed with these measures, it will continue to go and get deeper. It kind of worries that if everything we have has been is thrown at the crisis now, we don't have much left when the worst stage is come.
Yeah. Tuomas, can central banks money printing repair the damage done to the real economy where businesses have closed and millions have lost their jobs?
Of course not. This is something that we have a very scary historical parallel of this in the early 1920s in the Weimar Republic in Germany. When if you don't mind, I share a small historical analogy here. So the Weimar had lost the First World War, or the Great War, and she had accumulated quite a bit of debt, and then they were faced by war reparations and stuff like that, and they had the option of letting the system kind of go and default, and they decided not to. So they decided that they will support the economy despite of the falling production possibilities or the output by providing job guarantees and all this kind of stuff through money borrowed from the central bank. And I think many of our listeners know very well that it led to a hyperinflation. So we are dangerously, we are in a, well, we're in a very similar place here. We have a falling, production possibilities. The firms are going to go bankrupt, and now there is talk of these helicopter drops or debt monetization, which actually the Bank of England has already started. So we have kind of we are arrived in a point where hyperinflation has made itself possible again if we make the wrong choices here.
Yeah. Christine Lagarde, head of the ECB, how do you think she's doing in comparison to, let's say, Jerome Powell? Is she doing any better?
Well, I had my doubts about her, but the recent comments when she said that first the debt monetization is illegal in the eurozone, and that the helicopter drops of money would be very challenging through technical and legal issues, and that their cost benefits would be very questionable. Kind of made her, well, not my personal hero, but she definitely drew a line on the sand, and these are, if she keeps these lines, it will, I think it will save Europe at the end. While Powell seems to be willing to do anything, and that should scare the good people in the US, because that's, even if you have a reserve currency, you cannot print fiat currencies without unlimited quantities of fiat currencies without serious repercussions. So yeah, and in this sense, at the current policy lines as they are drawn, Christine Lagarde is doing better than Jerome Powell.
Okay. Yeah, I had to ask that question because I think a lot of our viewers in the U.S. who oftentimes we don't stay attuned to what's going on in Europe, so it's always good to get the perspective from what's going on in Europe. So appreciate that.
May I add something here?
Sure.
Your U.S. listeners should be very interested in Europe because we have the very weak banking sector, and we have the largest concentration of this global systemically important banks. So if we have a banking crisis, it will spread all over. It will come also to the U.S. Yeah. So I urge our U.S. customers and actually everyone on Twitter from U.S. to really understand the risk that Europe poses to the global economy. If we have a financial crisis now, like we probably will, it will start from Europe, not from U.S., not from China. It will come from Europe. If it starts from here, it goes global fast.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Um, Thomas, in your article, you highlighted a sentence which said, the thing to remember with socialist experiments is that they always concentrate power, economic and political, in the elite. And based on this definition, do you see power congealed to the minority elites, a global trend today, regardless of political systems? And if so, how did we arrive at such a point of unbalanced power?
Well, yeah, that's the how socialistic experiments have gone in the past, and they will go also in the future. And the deeper we wander into the strange land of central bank control of the economy, the more concentrated our system becomes. If you just think the recent actions of the Fed. So I haven't seen any guidelines. I don't know how they publish it, but how do they determine what bonds of what chunk rated companies they pay? You know, they will start pick winners and losers. And this is like very similar we did see, for example, in the Soviet Union. The centrally controlled government on the Politburo, basically, and all the army of bureaucrats decided which fields we support and which we let die. So, and that will lead to a concentration of power. And the other thing is that when you run these socialistic experiments or you centralize the control in the economy, it will stagnate the economic growth. And when the economic growth stagnates, the income growth stagnates. And this is bad for the middle class because they live or they prosper from the growth of incomes. And if the income growth stagnates for a prolonged period of time, the share of middle income will start to decrease. And if it continues long enough, the whole middle income group will be vanished, basically. So then we have just the capital owners, the political elite, and the kind of poor working class. This is the worst kind of world we would go into if we would continue on this path of concentrating more and more financial power to the central banks and governments. Then you ask, how did we end up here? I think it started in the September 11 attacks. That kind of changed something. You know, in the 1990s was kind of a free decay. The Soviet Union had collapsed. We had no enemies. Basically, world was free. And then came the attacks, and then we had enemies all over. And then we started to all this surveillance operation and stuff like that. So I think this current trend, if you may, is about 20 years old. And there is while all the measures to control the spread of the pandemic are necessary, there is the risk that it will concentrate more and more power to the political elite, and this is something we have to address at some point. Maybe not during the crisis, but after the pandemic has been won.
Yeah, power shifting to the elite. Do you think the U.S. Is in any danger of losing some constitutional freedoms or liberties?
I dearly hope not. We're not an expert on the U.S. politics, but you have relied, or the U.S. has relied on the on the great constitution for a long time, and I dearly hope that you will never, or they will never, relinquish on that, because that's the way. If you look at history. We have managed all kinds of horrible events, whether the economic crisis or pandemics or natural catastrophes or whatever, and those societies that have kept their legal integrity in the sense that they have followed their constitution have usually survived or have survived. But those who have succumbed in the anarchy, they are gone. And that's important to remember that constitutions and laws are what keeps societies together.
Yeah. Okay. Um, Third stage of the collapse is very interesting because you believe there are zombies in the midst of this pandemic, and that's a word that fans from Walking Dead they're going to know and they're going to like. Can you share with us the third stage of the collapse, which you call the flood, and how zombies in Europe and China factor into it?
Yeah, the zombies called here or described here are the zombie corporations and banks, which basically survive only because there's a flow of steady flow of cheap liquidity and money that has been floating around, and it has created these companies that are very unprofitable but still standing, which were labeled as zombies. I think it was 2008 article published in the I don't remember the actual journal, but anyway. So yeah, and the problem is that because they have survived only through the easy money. But now, even if you would get somehow this easy money period to continue, there is this hit on the real economy, and these weak corporations and banks will not sustain it, and they will start to, you know, topple and head into bankruptcies and defaults. And as there is such a large swath of those corporations, it is estimated that in China there are over 20% of all companies are zombies. In the Eurozone, it's over 13%, and in the US, probably over 14%. And these are really difficult to find and estimate, so the absolute figures could be much worse. And if you think that most of these will fail, like in China, like let's say 20% of companies would fail, that would be a massive hit. So that's why we call it the flood. And now the COVID-19 has kind of thrown a curveball on this stage in the sense that it will topple also companies that probably topple also companies that are were not zombies before, but whose business model has completely vanished. So it will add to the flood. But the flood is so dangerous or so crucial because when corporations start to fail, you lose jobs, you lose tax income, you lose income. And that's kind of the main phase of this crisis, and it may start within the next 2 months.
Yeah. Okay. Thomas, we touched on this earlier. The banks in Europe. Can you explain why you describe the European banking sector as tinder that can burst into flames at any moment?
Well, it all starts in 2008 when we had the financial crisis. The European leaders decided not to let the banks fail, but not also to recapitalize them. So while US let many smaller banks fail and recapitalize the bigger ones, we did none of that. So it's just one country, Iceland, whose whole banking sector basically collapsed because it was so big, but they recovered well. But we didn't. And then we had the Europe in general did not. Then we had the debt crisis of 2011, 2012, and we did the same mistake. We didn't let Greece default. We didn't let the banks who had lent to Greece to default, and we just artificially supported them. And then the ECB policies actually have been very detrimental on the profitability of banks. So the negative interest rates have hurt the banks. Yeah. The QE programs has actually hurt the banks. So it has the fragile banking sector that emerged from the 2008 crisis were made even more fragile. And it has been kept alive by this artificial support from the central bank, which has also made the banks even more fragile. So it's a really how would I say? Well, it's not. It's a equation that cannot last when you add a economic crisis there too, like which has now happened, or the hit to the real economy. So that's basically the reason why our banking sector is really the tinder that can light up the global financial sector. And this is very unfortunate because we had several occasions. We could have fixed this in several occasions, but we didn't.
Okay. How about the currency? Do you see the euro as a currency that that could fail and members start returning to their own currencies?
Yeah, for sure. I think we have currently about what is like 85% probability that the euro will break up within the next 5 years.
Wow.
The thing is that in previous crises, there has been a strong political will to sustain the euro, but that's almost gone. When you look at the like all our national leaders and how they speak of the euro, it's still like the facade is there. They are telling, yeah, euro is strong and euros, but there's doubt already.
Yeah.
And historically, we know that when the political will to sustain a common currency fails, the currency union fails, and we are really close of that point. And the thing is, it's really difficult to estimate how much saving the euro would cost, but I came with the number of 2 to 3 trillion euros. So that's like a massive amount. That's basically the annual GDP of Germany. We should throw in it. And looking at the current situation, with the eurozone countries just don't have the money. So it's just personally, I think we should just admit that this is this has gone already, and start to prepare for a controlled demolition in quotes of the euro. But I would not trust the euro currency at this moment. No.
Okay. Thomas, if you don't mind, what do you think a controlled demolition is going to look like?
Well, it should look like this all negotiations should be done in secret, and then we would prepare like a how do we operate the common European payment systems, how we deal with the debt, how we deal with the ECB, how we deal with target 2 imbalance and stuff like that should all be agreed under secrecy in these negotiations. And then just one day, every Eurozone country would notify that today we have established capital controls and you are now in Markka or Deutsche Markka or whatever currency. And we would still operate with the euro notes, with the euro denominated bank accounts in each country, because it will take time to transfer those. But we would have capital controls and markets would start to price the values of different currencies against each other. And it would start from there. But this has to be secret. This has to be denied all the way down. So no one can say, well, we are considering breaking up the euro. It would be a mayhem. This has to be secret operation. But I hope that our leaders are secretly planning to do that at some stage, at least.
Okay. Yeah. Also, in the third stage of the collapse, you've described China as the giant with clay feet. How hard would China's landing be, and will it impede its rise as a global superpower that replaces the United States?
Well, if you look at the history of these credit bonanzas or kind of this debt manias, China is leading the way. This is the biggest credit bubble ever in history of mankind, what China has accumulated, and it's mostly now in the real estate sector and the financial sector. And when it goes down, due to the collapse in global demand and economic activity, it will be a really hard landing. But China has a strong and innovative SME sector, so small and medium-sized enterprise sector, and they will rise from that economic drop. But the really interesting question is that what will the Communist Party of China survive the hit? And what will happen in these political things? That's the biggest question all investors should be considering. China will rise there from for sure. It will fall hard. It will rise, but what will happen between the fall and the rise is politically, especially, it will be interesting.
Can you share with us about the calamity, which is the fourth stage of the collapse, and how did you ensure that this projection is as accurate as possible?
Oh, well, good question. Yeah. Well, the calamity phase is basically just when you have a collapse of the or the flood of the corporate bankruptcies and stuff like that, it will be followed, if not preceded, by a banking crisis,
Yeah.
a very massive banking crisis, and possibly some collapse of the global financial market. So then you have a thing. You have a situation where first the government revenues have been dried up. The assets of pension funds, social security funds, unemployment funds have all collapsed, basically. So you have a situation when there's a big, massive holes have appeared on the financial fabric of modern societies. And you cannot fix those because everything, there's a big collapse. So you just cut all the benefits and all stuff like that. And it will lead to similar conditions, we think, than in the 1930s in the US. So there will be a widespread poverty, unemployment, and misery. And how we ensure that it's as accurate as possible, we just have to closely monitor how the flood states goes and what will be the response of the authorities, because that will determine how deep and long the calamity phase is. But it's definitely coming. We don't see any way to avoid it except for the hyperinflation, but that would be worse. So yeah, that is something we just have to face now.
Okay. You mentioned poverty, hyperinflation. Are we looking at perhaps even a form of feudalism coming back into play?
Yeah, sure. That could, in the worst case, if things get really bad, for sure. Yeah, we could return on this will be a return on the basic values, I think, in many retrospect. We've been many folks in the cities, major cities, for example, have been ridiculing the food producers and folks that were working at farms. And I think they will see their value rise in many retrospect. So this will bring us, I think, back to the basic values of life. How do we sustain life? Like we have food production and working with the land and stuff like that. This could bring us back to the very fundamentals of economic and human lives.
Okay. What do you think happens with our current monetary system, fiat money? What do you think happens during this stage?
It depends a lot how far the central banks will go. There is a possibility that we have an outright monetary collapse if they really try to print us through this, and then the fiat currencies will disappear for a while. And even in the case of very severe banking crisis, we could see problems with the fiat currencies. And so there's a real possibility that at the deepest part of the crisis, we will return to gold standard for a while. But we just have to go back to the fiat. But there might be a phase when we are using gold as currency or currency backed as gold again.
Okay. You mentioned one asset, gold. What are the other assets that would continue to do well in the calamity stage?
Well, that depends a lot what in the calamity stage actually is. But we did an analysis on that, and we had several asset classes, and it's just the gold was only thing that really showed a remarkable rise when we analyzed the past crisis. Silver could be one. Land, of course, could be one, but yeah. So, but it has to be something tied with with the real kind of the real economy and real life. So a very tangible asset in a sense. I think those will do the best. But this is something we have to think really, hard. We probably have a how to survive the crisis report coming out in June. So we will probably think these issues there too. But if we go back to the basics, then the very basic assets will do the best. That's my current thinking.
Do we transition, or is this something that is going to last for a new life, basically?
Well, yeah. Well, this is. I think this is going to be a transition. This is going to be a huge transition in economies and how we, how we will view the global economy and stuff like that. So I just hope that the transition will be fast and not a prolonged one. So we have to accept that things are going to be bad for a while and things are going to change. And then the faster we accept this, the faster the crisis will pass.
Tuomas, how long would this global recession last?
3 to 5 years is our current estimate. So the kind of um, the faster we accept, we kind of if we openly embrace that the reset will come, and it will just need to happen, and let the economy kind of cleanse, while supporting systemically important institutions, then this will be relatively fast. Like in 3 years, this could be over, and we would be back in growth. But if we try to uphold these old institutions whose time just has come, it will drag on. So this is a big choice for us as a humanity to accept the severity of the situation, the crisis we are facing, and the changes we are facing. And the faster we do this, the faster the crisis will pass.
Okay. So this final stage, the recovery stage, how do you think it's going to look then?
That will be interesting. But if you think about how many technological innovations we have seen within the last few years, and I'm a big tech fan in a sense that I really think we have a massive breakthroughs coming from energy and all kind of sectors. So if we can clear the kind of the financial excess and the old bad investments and the zombie corporation, we have a kind of set the slate free for a new, very productive, innovative ways of doing stuff and producing stuff. And when you have cleansed the financial excess, there's room for investment on these technological innovations and stuff. So I see if you let the cleansing phase go deep enough, I see that we see actually that we will experience a very rapid and possibly very long period of growth and prosperity when this is over. We just have to try to look through the crisis, which is now coming, or which has now started.
Yeah. You mentioned the word free. I think a lot of people are going to find that word a huge relief as we go through all these things going forward. Would the recovery also involve a new monetary system? And would people once again demand, and you touched on this, that they want it to be backed by gold again after going through this terrible outcome and experiment of fiat?
Yeah, I would see in my thinking, we haven't really taken a stand as a firm on this, but I think that we will have a gold or precious metal backed banking system when this is through. So yeah, in that sense, but it will be we need to have. I'm a growth economist by training, and as I have studied economic crisis for 12 years. And the thing is that I think that fiat is the way to go, but fiat can be backed with gold, and that will make the system more robust. So that's one of the options. We probably it could probably be the best option after the crisis, how to fix our monetary systems. So yeah, but there's these digital currencies which we'll see how they behave in a crisis. I don't have a huge trust on them, but we'll see. But there's going to be a massive changes, and we just need to get rid of the central banks. That's for sure.
Amen to that. Tuomas Malinen, before we wrap up, can you tell us more about what you call the darkest report you have had to write, and when will it be available?
About 2 weeks ago, we started to think that we have to take some stand on the how the pandemic may play out and how it will affect the global economy. And IMF actually started talking about the possibility of the second wave. So we draw some historical analogies and write a report which has three scenarios, and they range from good to very bad. And we then try to model those economically, and we don't give any probabilities or anything like that on how what scenario may play out, but we have to map these different possibilities, and it will be available within 2 weeks, hopefully just right at the beginning of May. And it gets really dark when you look at how things have played out in history and what is the worst scenario we can see coming out of this. So in all honesty, it has been rather difficult to write, but this is just something we have to consider also.
Okay. Tuomas, we appreciate it. You've given us some really great and some really eye-opening info. And how can our viewers follow more of your work?
No, just go to a website and follow me on Twitter. We have the constantly updating blog, the stages of the collapse, and I strongly recommend everyone to come as our subscribers. We have the Depercon service, for example, which we provide the real time or the event related alerts, and we have the monthly outlooks. So I think that would be a very good for everyone to follow the path of the global economy through the crisis.
Okay. Tuomas Malinen, we appreciate the time you've given us, and we wish you all the best.
Thanks. You too.
That was Tuomas Malinen, CEO of GnS Economics, sharing with us about the coming banking crisis in Europe. To learn more, please visit his website, gnseconomics.com. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the SBTV channel to be updated on new content, and do also check out the SBTV podcast on iTunes and Spotify.